Well, Sam Raimi is definitely back. Let's talk about it. What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? Welcome back into JC's Movies, where you can see all kind of movie and TV show talk with me, JC, especially within the superhero, comedy, and horror genres, which we'll be talking about today as we have a spoiler review coming for Send Help, the January horror release as Sam Raimi gets back into the director's chair to helm another horror movie, and we're going to go all into it here with some spoilers momentarily. But before I do, just a quick reminder, if you haven't, hit that subscribe button if you're a fan of any of those genres that I just talked about that we cover here on the channel. Plus, we bring you movie news every Monday through Friday here, every weekday on the channel. So be sure you subscribe here to catch some of that. If you're a fan of movies and TV shows, help us out that way. And you can also help me out just by hitting that thumbs up button while you're in here. That helps this video hit that YouTube algorithm and find more movie and TV show fans like you and me. And I'd really appreciate that just as much. So let me give you some spoiler-free kind of takeaways here before I dive into the spoiler review, which if you haven't checked it out, I did put up a YouTube short here on the channel, giving my out-of-theater reaction, my instant reaction as soon as I watch Send Help. I like to give a few days before I come here with the full review because I do like to dive in on spoilers. But before I do, just kind of some overall thoughts. So good to have Sam Raimi back in the director's chair, right? That's what I think you got to lead this off with. Also, I mean, this is a movie that, I'm sure if you've seen any trailers whatsoever, you realize it's people stuck on a, island by themselves. So it really requires some good performances to carry this thing. And I think you get that here with both Rachel McAdams, who I've seen a lot, and then Dylan O'Brien, who I hadn't seen as much, but I was super impressed by both of them and the way that they carried this movie throughout. You also get kind of, I guess, a little bit of a wish fulfillment angle to go with, the horror, the jump scares, the gore that you're going to get with Sam Raimi, the cool shots, the fun, action shots, the set pieces. But the wish fulfillment angle, I think, comes from, one of these two characters. If you've seen the trailer, you know which one it is. Like I said, I'll keep it spoiler free as possible right here before we dive into spoilers momentarily. But we've all had jobs where we hate it. We don't like our boss. It's not going our way. We've been there for years and years, doing the best that we can, and we just keep getting overlooked. And it's all about who you know, and that other guy's getting their promotion, and there's nepotism, and that's why this guy's now your boss versus somebody else that was your boss, so on and so forth. And in this movie, you kind of get to live vicariously through a character that's dealing with that, and then get to see her turn those tables, and have it go around the other way to where she's the one with the power and she's the one in control. And so it's a little bit of a wish fulfillment angle from that as well. So I think all of those things add up to a really fun movie here that I personally really enjoyed. I'll give my rating towards in the review after I get into spoilers, but I will say here in the spoiler free section, if you haven't seen it, go check out Send Help. I think you'll really like this. If you're a horror fan, if you're a Sam Raimi fan, if you just want to have a fun time at the movies, I would recommend Send Help for sure. And I'll tell you why as we get set to dive into some spoilers here for the Send Help spoiler review on JC's Movies. All right, so we'll dive into some spoilers here for Send Help, which, like I said, I really enjoyed. I took some notes here while I was in the movie theater, so I will reference them as we kind of go throughout, and I'll try and run through the plot here, tell you what I liked, what I didn't like, all of those good things. And starting right off with some of the character names in this, Linda Little is the name of our, main character here, essentially Rachel McAdams' character. And you got to love the alliteration, right? If you're a fan of comic books, fan of superheroes, like as I talk about here on the channel, being superhero, comedy, and horror being my main genres, I do love comic books, and, most villains, superheroes in comic books got that alliteration to their names. So right away, Linda Little, I was like, awesome name. Love it already right off the bat. And then, of course, that is, the Rachel McAdams character. And then you get the Dylan O'Brien character, whose name is Bradley Preston. He's taken over the company from his father. And as I talked about there a little bit in the spoiler-free thoughts, essentially, Linda Little's been with the company for a long time, but she's kind of, looked over and neglected as a lot of people are at times, even someone that's very valuable to the company, it seems like she is, but she was still yet ignored and neglected. And gets even worse, of course, when you have the nepotism angle where Bradley Preston, Dylan O'Brien's character, takes over for his father, although he's maybe not deserving of that position as the CEO of that company. All of those things factor in here, and I think Dylan O'Brien does an awesome job playing kind of this douchebag cake eater character, if you will, that is Bradley Preston throughout this movie. Also, one of my very early pros, in addition to both of those two performances from Rachel McAdams and Dylan O'Brien in this movie, as I addressed a little bit earlier, was just opening to this movie. Credits are popping up, you're seeing cast list, you're seeing everyone involved. Of course, so good to see it directed by Sam Raimi again, but I see on the score Danny Elfman, and I'm like, automatic pro already before I even hear the score, which the score was great throughout to back that up. But Danny Elfman, Sam Raimi together again, always for that. I think a nice touch here was showing us early on, as you're kind of getting a little bit of a montage in the opening there, that Rachel McAdams' character, Linda Little, in this movie watches Survivor, kind of religiously. So that she's kind of well prepared for what's going to happen later on in the movie, right? And so right away, kind of when these two characters are introduced to one another, we see her kind of trying to sell herself to him, but she's got tuna fish on her face, which he can't focus on anything but that. And the movie does a great job of kind of conveying that just through the shots, which yet again, another great job there by Sam Raimi with his direction, kind of just allowing this all to play out in a show but don't tell type of manner, right? And so the camera zooming in on the tuna on her face, it's zooming in on Dylan O'Brien's eyes, and you just see the disgust. And he even hammers that home later on, calling her a disgusting woman in private. We find out that his father had promised her a promotion, which she had been there I think 6 or 7 years. Instead, when the son, Dylan O'Brien's character Bradley, comes in, he's going to give it to his friend Donovan Murphy, who is a guy who took credit for her work. We see that in a scene in the opening earlier in the movie, and he actually wants to move Linda Little to a satellite office just because he can't stand look at her, be around her. He talks about her having obnoxious odor, all of those things. So we have that in the movie. And then I have here in my notes Serrano from Major League, now the All-State guy. I hadn't seen him in a long time, it seemed like, for me. And that's of course Dennis Haysbert that I'm talking about there, for you guys that don't know, but definitely seeing him pop up was a pleasant surprise. And from there we kind of get to him informing her she's not getting the promotion, that he's going to give it to Donovan, who's been there 6 months versus her 6 or 7 years. And he kind of, the reason he gives her is tells her she's not a people person, quote unquote, enough for an executive position, and wants her on the plane trip that they're about to take to Bangkok. And when you hear that about the plane trip, you're like, okay, so that's where this goes down, and we get to where I know that we're going to from the trailers and such. But he says he wants her on that plane trip so that she could maybe prove him wrong. So she comes with him on that plane trip to Bangkok. Which, funny enough, on that plane trip, the guy Donovan has on his laptop clips where she has auditioned for the show Survivor, and he plays it for Bradley, and they're kind of making fun of her in the front of the plane. And it's not ever said for sure if she can hear him or not and know this, but to me it's like she's right there, not that far away. I think she noticed that they were making fun of her, and that just kind of adds to where we go from there once we get onto the deserted island. So obviously it goes kind of the way you're expecting it to go. Turbulence starts occurring, and her and Bradley at the time of the turbulence are the only two buckled up, because this is kind of when he's showing Bradley those clips of her on Survivor, rather. So everyone else kind of flying out the plane. Donovan, the guy that was showing those clips, the guy that got the promotion instead of her, actually is clinging on to her, trying to get her out of her seatbelt, trying to get her to hang on to him, save him, all of these things towards the end. And this is where you kind of see a little bit of that dark side of her a little bit early on here. And instead of what you expect, maybe because he has his hand on her throat trying to steal her seat, she's able to grab some, sliding by silverware, some cutlery that's coming out and flying out the window of the plane, and kind of stabs him, gets him loose. And then, the only two survivors, it appears, are going to be Bradley and Linda, of course, as you would expect. And we'll get into kind of this horror version of Castaway with them stranded on, a desert island from here on out. And then, chaos ensues, right? And as all of that begins, we kind of see her, setting up shelter, finding ways to get them food and water, all of this while Bradley's essentially passed out because, he's suffered a leg injury. That's what we kind of learn about here in the initial stages of them being trapped on this desert island, is he's got an injured leg. He can barely move. So obviously she's kind of taking care of everything. And in a way, he kind of resents this. He calls her Susie Homemaker even at one point, even though she's the one that was keeping him alive with the shelter. She's built that, gotten them food, gotten them water, all of that. And this is where you get the turn. And then from here on out, you really get to get that wish fulfillment angle that I talked about in the earlier spoiler-free thoughts, because she's like, we're not in the office anymore, Bradley. And kind of progresses on from there. And you also kind of get to see more of that dark side, which continues, throughout the rest of this movie. So I thought, that was a big pro. But then we get to one of my first cons there, and that is one of the initial kind of threats there on the island is a boar, which it's really cool, in some parts, but it starts with a CGI boar jump scare, and the CGI just not the best. And you guys know I'm not the biggest fan of CGI, so to me that was my first con. But they make up for it with a great gore kill there, on the boar once she takes him out. Great gore, good carnage candy there. That was a pro for me. So I guess that kind of balanced out in some ways from the first sighting to, the last sighting, right, of that boar. And from there, we kind of see how she's feeling about this. Not long thereafter, we see a boat pass by, and she has a chance to signal it, and she kind of stops herself, and then you hear her actually, out loud say, "Not yet." Doesn't signal the boat. So you're like, oh, she's kind of enjoying this power that she has and enjoying being here on this boat. And, being a fan of Survivor, she is kind of have some wish fulfillment of her own right here, like in this movie, right? Her character of Linda Little. Then we do get, I would call this movie, as much as it is horror, there are some, dark comedy moments in it for sure. And one of the kind of laugh out loud moments for me in the theater, there were multiple times I feel like I was laughing audibly in the theater at this one. But one is when he tries to eat a bug for the first time, because they kind of get into this thing and he's like, I can take care of myself. And so he tries to go off, make his own camp. And then he finds a bug and tries to eat it. And just the way that he overacts trying to eat this bug, Dylan O'Brien, was super hilarious. Had me laughing out loud with that. And then he kind of comes over to her, wanting to rejoin with her because he knows he's kind of messed up. And he has a piece of the bug in his teeth. And the camera, does a good job of zooming in on that. And then zooming in on Linda, getting her reaction. And this is kind of the moment where we're like, oh, the tables have turned officially now, because it's kind of very reminiscent of that initial scene with the tuna on her face, and he's disgusted by her. And now we get kind of the polar opposite of that in this scene. So kind of from there, they kind of team up, are back on good terms again. She even takes him on a hike and is showing him things, what berries are poisonous, all of this stuff. But they come to a part on a cliff when they're going up to kind of this top of this hike, where the ground kind of falls off and it's dangerous, and she almost falls. He saves her. And so, that comes to play again later, that same, area of the island, so to speak. But then after this, we get some kind of exposition once they start having, I guess, some heart-to-heart conversation, you could say, that kind of gives us some information about these characters. She was married. Her husband died. And she, was kind of telling him about this, and, she kind of states he wasn't very nice, didn't know how to love. You get, kind of the implication that he was abusive, those kind of things. And then, Dylan O'Brien's character, Bradley, follows this up by telling Linda that, his dad, the former CEO of the company, was kind of a stranger to him. He feels like he didn't know a single thing about him. And his mom was abusive to him as well. So, both these characters kind of, trauma bonding, so to speak, right at this moment. And you kind of start to feel empathy towards not only Linda, who you already did, but even Bradley a little bit at this point. And then that darker angle that I was talking about with Linda comes out a little bit more here as well, as she talks about, the night her husband died, she used to always hide his keys because he was an alcoholic. She didn't hide his keys the night he died and kind of let him go out. And of course, he gets in a car accident and passes away. He died in a car accident, but arguably, could she be responsible? Does she have some kind of guilt over that? I mean, you would think so, right? From what you're told there in that story. So from there, we also find out she doesn't ever want to leave the island. She kind of states that, not long thereafter. And then we're probably, approaching, middle break here, second act, towards the end of the second act of this movie, when a big storm rolls in, kind of our first big, one turning point of this movie, and they have to hide in a cave together throughout that night. They use kind of each other's body heat to stay warm, and you're kind of wondering, is there a romantic angle here? Where is this going to go? Is this going to go with, a happy ending with these two ending up together? And so that's why I think from here on out, there are some really good twists from the second act on, in my opinion. So after that big storm rolls in, they have to rebuild camp right after that. He offers to cook for her after that to kind of make up for, the earlier part of the movie. And you're like, oh, okay, so these two are kind of coming together. This is maybe a feel good kind of second half of this movie is what you're starting to think. So he comes over, he's made her like some sushi, some, stuff that he's, cooked up there on the island, feeds it to her. And then all of a sudden she starts getting groggy and stuff. And you're like, no way. He used the information she gave him to poison her. And you're like, wow. So he had, in fact, does just that. As soon as she starts to pass out, you see him run back to the woods, uncover a raft that I guess he had built in secret, and run out onto the ocean and try and escape on a raft that he built. And at this point, I put pro for sure right here because this was a really nice twist. The first of, a couple nice twists that I'm going to talk about here towards the latter portion of this movie. But ultimately, his raft gets destroyed by a huge wave, but she still saves him. So you can see kind of Linda ultimately has kind of the better heart of these two. It seems like the fact that she still goes out of her way to save him. But despite that, good heart there, that still makes you, want to root for her there in that moment. Still, that darker side is present that we've already talked about, and we'll learn more about that momentarily. As not only in this next, scene or two, does she say, okay, I'm going to cook for you now, no hard feelings, you seem like they've made up. She feeds him some octopus, but it's a poisonous type of octopus that basically temporarily paralyzes him, and he can't, feel anything with his nerves. He can't move, nothing. And so she says at that point, I'm going to fix you, talks about similar to, quote unquote, fixing animals. She's got a knife, and the camera work here is great as well. Just kind of adds to the tension, but also they keep everything kind of, chest up. And then you see her have the knife kind of below the frame, and you hear her cutting and stuff. And you see tears roll down Dylan O'Brien's character's eyes because he can't feel anything, but he kind of knows what's happening because she's telling him. But yet again, it's another nice twist because then we see her pick it up and say it's just a rat, as if she was just toying with him, kind of faking that she was about to castrate him or something like that. So super dark moment in the movie where you're like, oh God. But then when the reveal happens, it's like you exhale as the audience just right with, Dylan O'Brien's character. So I thought that was another great touch and a great moment there from Sam Raimi, as she ends it by saying, Linda Little speaking, saying, don't mistake her kindness for weakness. The next time will be for real. And just, giving us a little bit more hint into that darkness that she has inside of her, which I think is officially sold to us when her fiance shows up. So, as you would kind of expect, we learned earlier in the movie that Bradley is engaged and his fiance shows up to rescue them, only one other person with her. And you kind of get Linda asking questions about who all's with them, who knows they're there early on. And you're like, oh no, this might go dark, and starts taking them up onto the area that they were hiking in earlier. And that's why I said this comes back into play, because she remembers that area that she almost fell from. And we see her take them there, and we kind of suspect what happens here, and we don't get answers on it till later. And at this point I was like, she lets them fall off the cliff. We learn later that it's, a little bit darker than that. We'll get to that momentarily. But moving on from that, Bradley kind of figures this out when he finds her arm in the sand with the, wedding ring right there on her ring finger that he had given her. And that's the point when you're like, oh, this is going to turn into, an all out brawl between these two or something. And only one of these two is likely going to make it off this island. And when the two meet up, that's kind of exactly where this heads. She tries to tell Bradley that his fiance slipped, and he asks, oh, it was an accident just like your husband. And at that point, she kind of, reaches for the knife that she had in the holster that she had told him that she had found, wash up on the shore. It's not there. He has it. Chase ensues, and ends up, she sneak attacks him, tries to strangle him with her shoelaces. He rips part of her scalp off. It starts getting absolutely gnarly. What a fight. Because then she bites out a chunk of his shoulder. He gouges her eyeball. She eats his engagement ring. I mean, chews it up and swallows it, and then, finishes it with a fuck you, Bradley. And at this point, I wrote in my notes, what a gnarly fight, because absolutely incredible. One of my favorite sequences of the movie right there. And, my description doesn't do it justice, I don't think, but still pretty damn sweet. And so from there, he ends up, a little bit down the shore, and he finds a house nearby. Goes into the house, and guess what? Only to find out and realize that she had already found this place. Now, this is probably my biggest pro of the movie, is this absolute twist right here at the end, where we get this montage of she found this house very early on. That's where the knife came from that she has, that she told him washed up on the shore, and she'd already thrown all the other knives out, and she essentially kind of kept them there. They probably could have been rescued a whole hell of a lot sooner, but as we heard her say even earlier in the movie, she didn't want to leave. But still, what a damn twist. This is what really, sold the movie home for me, was the way the third act not only improved everything, but delivered some surprising moments, as this is actually the house of a Wall Street billionaire, the owner of it. And so, all the food that she's cooked, the fruit that she's found, a lot of it has all just came from her bringing it from this house, and, so on and so forth. And so then from there, the battle ensues, and we see her essentially end up killing him when she, realizes that he's taken the horn off of one of these masks in the house there. And, just a kind of quick jump cut then to a year later, which is where this thing kind of finishes up. And I do like the ending. I was wondering, how are they going to, drive this home? And the ending's really actually pretty cool, because it flashes forward to a year later where we see her playing golf, something that, she never did before. So it's like, she's definitely, having her wish fulfillment. I feel like that's a great theme for this movie. I feel like we mentioned that several times, as wish fulfillment, but she's, playing golf now, and, she's known as the only survivor. She's being interviewed, by the news. And also we learn, through exposition there with, that news interview, that she's also written a bestseller. She's got a fancy car that she kind of gets to drive off in after the interview and quite literally ride off into the sunset. And so it's a really, great story if you look at it from that aspect of what I talked about there in the spoiler-free part, where, this woman that was looked over and ignored by her company and by her boss, and then gets a chance to, become the one in power, both literally while they're on a desert island, and then in the future moving forward from that, to where she kind of takes on the role that probably should have been hers from the beginning, because she was much more qualified for that job than Bradley already, and of course more qualified than his friend that he was going to promote to the other promotion that her father had promised her. So you get kind of her getting what should have been rightfully hers, in the roundabout way, but we get to take a really fun journey to get there as well, with all of the awesome gore, even some cool jump scares, some really nice twist that I didn't see coming, because I think that's the one thing that surprised me with this movie, is when you see the trailers, you're like, oh, they're stuck on a desert island. She's going to get to be kind of the one in control now. How many twists within there can there be? And I'll tell you, way more than I expected. So definitely pleasantly surprised. And just watching this kind of makes you remember how much you like Sam Raimi as a director, with what he did with this movie. And I came away super excited, and I think more so than ever, this past January, we had some good horror releases. Usually January is where horror movies go to die, right? But this year, some surprisingly really good movies coming out of there, with Send Help, from Sam Raimi. Super glad to have him back in the director's chair, with this movie. And I think, as promised, my rating here at the end, I think I got to go with an 8 at least on this one. I'm going to go 8.0. Maybe could stretch it to 8.5 even if I wanted to. We're going to settle on 8.0 right now. Maybe the more it sits with me, it'll grow higher in the rankings. But, right now, I can definitely say that I've really enjoyed both horror movies that I've seen this year, Primate and Send Help. If you've seen both of them, let me know which one of those two was your favorites in the comments, or anything you want to talk about there, movie, TV show related. Always appreciate those interactions. Hope you guys have enjoyed this rather lengthy Send Help spoiler review, but it was a movie that I had a lot of thoughts about and wanted to talk about a lot of the different angles, from within it. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the review, and hopefully you guys enjoyed the movie as well, just like I did. Giving it an 8 out of 10 just means to me that we need to see Sam Raimi more in the director's chair. I know he likes producing, but come back and direct some more stuff, particularly within the horror genre, which we love to talk about here on JC's Movies. But really enjoyed Send Help. Hope you guys did as well, and I hope you guys enjoyed this review of it. Appreciate you tuning into this one, and I will catch you on the next one.